everybody, welcome back to another video by Scully. So I wanted to talk about something in this video that I'd kind of been thinking about lately, and kind of something I tend to think about pretty decent amount in general. But basically I wanted to talk about how perspective can kind of play a really big part on how you see things. Not only is perspective supposed to kind of be something that kind of paints a picture of what you see in your day-to-day life, but it can also kind of give you an idea of why somebody else might think or see something a certain way, which can get very complicated depending on how, two completely different people see the world very differently. The reason why I feel like this is a very important topic is not only from a social standpoint, being able to relate to people, but your perspective can change over time too, believe it or not, and you don't always realize it. The way you see something when you're a kid versus when you're an adult can be very, very different, especially depending on what kind of situation that it was. So, if you're especially a person who's prone to something like anxiety, perspective is a very, very big factor that can play into part, because how you see something and how something can affect you or even make you feel can be very different as to how it could affect somebody else. Something that you're thinking about or something that you look at that can make you think about something and in turn make you more anxious may not have that same effect on somebody else depending on what it is. So that can be pretty groundbreaking with trying to figure out what exactly is causing something like anxiety. One of my biggest things kind of with something like anxiety is that anxiety, it's really big with control, where you don't have a lot of, if you don't feel like you have a lot of control over something, a situation, or even just maybe certain feelings you have, your anxiety can tend to run quite high, because you just kind of have a hard time maybe making the connection as to why those things are happening in the first place. But as you start to understand yourself better as a person, the way you see the world, the way you see things, certain things about you, like what makes you anxious, can actually start to make a lot more sense pretty quickly. And I feel like this is something that also kind of changes over time, because something when you're maybe younger may cause you a lot of discomfort and even give you anxiety, but once you're old enough to maybe look at it a little differently, understand why it's making you anxious, or just maybe have a better kind of understanding as to, now that you're older, you can kind of maybe reason yourself mentally into, okay, well, that doesn't bother me so much anymore because I look at it this way now. And maybe when you were a kid, maybe it was different. So this is why I feel like that this is a very, very big topic in a lot of ways, but people maybe don't always kind of think about it. I mean, perspective is very biased, and it is very subjective. And that's kind of why over time, as you grow into a person, hopefully your perspective not only kind of changes in terms of growing up into an adult, but depending on what situations you're in or what kind of people you're with, or if you're relating to somebody else's situation who's very different from you, if you try to see it maybe more their way, you can kind of add that to how you see the world, and you can kind of get a better understanding, and that's how you can become more, have more empathy or sympathy as a person. And rather than looking at things just one way, you learn to look at them from different angles. And that's very important as well, not only with just people having different opinions from each other, but also just really kind of getting a better understanding. When you actually learn how to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, because that's a very, very strong trait to have, and it can be learned. But I mean, a lot of things that people learn in life, they're not just born knowing it. They have to kind of grow as a person and gain more experience. And that's always something that's, growing as a person in a lot of ways is not always easy, but it's a very wonderful thing if you're able to do so. So kind of back to the anxiety thing I was talking about. As somebody who's also had a lot of anxiety in my life, I feel like it's kind of interesting looking at something, like I said, if it was something I thought about more so when I was younger versus now. It's really interesting how I can actually kind of look back on that and think, oh, at the time, this is what made me anxious, this is what popped into my mind, and that's what kind of triggered some of the negative feelings I had about something. But then as I got older and I looked at that same situation, it maybe didn't bother me so much anymore, not only because I'd grown and learned to deal with any negative feelings that came with it, but I kind of learned what the source of that was as well. And with anxiety, or just really any kind of negative feelings, one of the very frustrating things about it is that you don't always know what's causing these feelings. You give yourself a hard time for having them, so then you start telling yourself, well, I shouldn't feel that way, I have no reason to feel that way, and you start beating yourself up. Well, if it's with something like anxiety, the worst thing you can tell yourself is not to feel that way, because if you truly have feelings about something, you can't just simply brush them under a rug. I mean, I suppose you could, but is that very healthy? Well, no, because they're still there, and they're going to keep on kind of coming back until you learn to kind of sort them out and deal with them. So, again, with those feelings, one of the things you can kind of do that really kind of help that over time is not only giving yourself the room, the space that you need to kind of deal with those feelings, but also I feel like over time it kind of does become more clear as to why you feel a certain way. Because sometimes you can have feelings about something and they can be kind of like be embedded into your subconscious. But depending on what the situation or how strongly you feel about it, it might kind of become habitual to just kind of push it aside, which at the time is probably understandable, but over time those feelings are still going to still be there. So once you kind of allow yourself to kind of explore that more, you can kind of dig deeper into it and kind of realize like, oh, I felt this way about this situation for this reason, or oh, it was nothing against this person personally, it's just this thing they said made me feel bad. And once I realized that was what was making me feel bad and it wasn't the person in general, then you feel better. So kind of things like that. I feel like that with especially in a lot of very high pressured situations, it's easy to kind of go along with certain things people say. People can sometimes have an effect on how you feel about things. Like they maybe tell you to, or maybe they don't even directly tell you how to feel about certain things, but it's kind of implied and you just kind of go along with it for a while. And over time, if you start to feel something that's maybe different than maybe what was appropriate for that situation, you can start to give yourself a really hard time where it's not really very necessary because, again, you are a person with feelings and you're allowed to have feelings about things, even if it doesn't always match what the other person thinks. And sometimes communicating that with people in various situations, like if you're growing up and it was a relative who, maybe they had your best interest and they love you and they always did really great things for you, but you had various times where maybe you felt more kind of obligated to go along with certain things you didn't want to do, and maybe you didn't know how to communicate that to the person at the time. And maybe over time, if depending on the situation, you kind of felt more absorbed in that situation than you really wanted to be, and maybe you kind of resented the person a little bit. And I know probably sounds like a little bit of a weird situation, but if we're just picking an example. But but a situation like that could be something over time can harbor a lot of feelings, a lot of resentment, things that you don't really want to feel, but they are there. And maybe you wanted to talk to the person about it, but you didn't really know how. So you just kind of kept it to yourself, and those feelings never really got resolved. So, if this was something that happened many years ago and you think, oh, well, it's kind of in the past now, but you still kind of have these feelings about it, well, those feelings were appropriate for that time, and they're very understandable. Hopefully it's something that would not affect this relationship now, again, this hypothetical situation. But if you sit there and, like, in this fake scenario, if you tell yourself that you're not allowed to have those feelings, and you're not really giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. And that's kind of an example of how, like, again, you probably don't want to cause too much of a conflict in a situation like that, but that is a perfect example about how momentary or even just kind of short-term emotions can progress long-term and cause a lot of unnecessary guilt for the person feeling them. So if that's something that you've been holding on to for a really long time, really give yourself the space to kind of, really acknowledge that that those feelings are there, but you don't have to hold on to them forever. You can give yourself peace. You can let those things go, and you can kind of heal from that negative experience, regardless of how severe or minor it was at the time. Because, nobody has the right to tell you how to feel about things, and, people tend to keep a lot of things to themselves because they feel it's more socially appropriate, and, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't feel like you have to carry so much baggage when it's not necessary. And over time, things, especially situations, like, if it's something a long time ago, they can make more sense. We're growing as people all the time. We're always learning. Our brains are always working in ways they maybe weren't a couple years ago or even months ago. And sometimes change can be quick and sometimes it's slow. But every day we're alive. Every breath of air we take, we are always growing. We're always changing. We are always building experiences for a better future. So I just really wanted to take the time to kind of shed some light on things like that and just, really allow yourself to just keep growing and keep being the good person that you are. Keep being you, and don't feel like that you aren't allowed to have feelings in situations, because you are. Feelings can be confusing. They can even be maybe even a little inappropriate at times, but they are normal and they are human. So just know that about yourself, and know that it's okay to have feelings as long as you express them appropriately. But until next time, have a great day.